And Klaus Donna goes on and he talks about things in Peru that he has researched in Ica, which is a city in Peru. Ica Peru Museum, done by Maria Reich, which was a German lady, I think at the turn of the century, of the last century. She started getting her hands on all these artifacts and made her museum. Among these artifacts are some skulls of the ancient Peruvians that would change the skull shape of their children to kind of imitate the deity's shape. And for belief and religious reasons, they would shape them and elongate these skulls. This is well known. However, there was one skull that didn't account for any scientific plausible explanation, because amazingly, you would expect the skull to be elongated. Okay, that's fine. That has been done before, but the bone mass doesn't change. It's just the shape is changed, but there's still as much bone as there was before. And one of these skulls showed double bone mass, which meant it wasn't elongated just naturally. There was actually double bone mass on the bone. So where did this specimen come from? And it still had some hair on it, and even hair on it and stuff. And here, I don't know, it's not in this museum probably, but there are some other skulls in Peru, which are pretty interesting, because when the human skull is actually forming inside, and the human skull is protecting the brain for the first time, three plates unite in the center and so close up the skull. That's a modern Homo sapiens pattern in the skull. They found two skulls, or three skulls I think, which had two plates and not three plates on them. So this was an absolute outrageous find, because it would question the evolutionary theory in its totality. I mean, this is a totally different evolutionary branch. Where did these living organisms and living beings come from? So that's a really big mystery, and this opens up the doorway to so many mythical legends and stories about the ancient tradition that ancient and traditional cultures all over the world have, that we have assumed, that including myself have assumed to be mere mythical legends and explaining some other religious beliefs. But there's obviously some scientific findings out there that question all these scientific models and skeptic models, and just what is the real link? I just would like to know, what is the real link between myth and actual reality and actual archaeology? So there might be some truth to all this. I don't know what it might be, what it might not be, and what it might be, because I do think it's important to have an open mind, but also know how to discern, synthesize, and analyze information, and also be kind of objective in some things, because that's why we have both hemispheres for. One is to be objective and calculate and plan, and the other and separate, and the other is to have a more global and feelingness to things too. So I remain open-minded, and I certainly know there's more to history and science that we are being showed or taught, not necessarily because it's been restrained, but I do believe, I have been led to believe that much of it is for this reason. Most of it is because of ignorance, because most of scientists are not even aware of these things. It's really an establishment, and it depends. It has many twists to it, economical twists and cultural twists and political twists. We wouldn't want religion to interfere in so many political aspects of life today, and vice versa, and it's just a really delicate matter. So controlling information and maintaining a certain paradigm is important to control the masses, and this can be done for good or for bad. Too bad, personally, I think that it has somewhat deformed in today's society. I mean, probably the original intentions were pure and kind of well constructed, but it has kind of deformed to a more limited and really close-minded paradigm today. An interesting fact, for example, talking about this global civilization. So there's global writings all over the place of the same writings. There's findings of one kind of culture and one kind of fossils and one kind of mummies in one continent where they shouldn't be. And there's also the fact that, for example, so many legends, so many mathematical facts, astronomical beliefs, religious beliefs, their deities. It's like two people looking at the same mountain, and they go each to their own house and draw it in a different way because they don't have the same skills or understanding of the mountain. They interpret them in different ways, yet the mountain they saw is the same. So what is it that links all these cultures in mythology, in religion, and in science and knowledge? What is it that links them and made them one whole? I mean, there must be some factor that we're missing. That is such an important factor. That is a factor that both relates to evolution on a genetic level, to a cultural level, and to so many other things. So if you're interested in knowing, it is important to research all this, because it might tell us a bit of what we are learning that is misinformation and what is truly more information, probably reliable information, in the sense that it might not be absolute, but it's more reliable because it's genuine. And yeah, interesting facts, for example, that in both the Hopi tribes, the Olmec tribes in Central America and South America, the Egyptians, the Australians, and even in Europe, they have found there were found boomerangs. And these boomerangs were supposed to be used for hunting. I wouldn't think of a boomerang just like that. I pretty much personally think it's a pretty original idea, having something that would come back at you or something. And I wouldn't think the probabilities of someone for different cultures in all over the world thinking of the same thing without any contact before that. That sounds pretty close-minded to me, and even outrageous. If we're talking about objectiveness, we have to be objective and see the link in between these things. The fact that the link really contradicts, and more than contradicts, it challenges many established theories is different. Establishment doesn't want to have to deal with many uncertainties, and that is different to being objective, scientific, and empirical. So again, it is not that science is against these findings and against all these mystical aspects of it. It just has to connect to it. The thing is that science has kind of diverged from its original meaning, which was discovery, which was open-mindedness, which was it was objectiveness and empirical findings. But when there are empirical findings that have to be taken into account and aren't, when then the scientific method is irresponsive. So many of these facts I have mentioned are these are just little facts from the Yonaguni constructions undersea. I mean, in Yonaguni in southeastern Japan, 25 meters under the sea level. In 1984, they discovered these constructions underwater, and it's a ceremonial archaeological site. It is huge. It is really big, probably 600 feet long, really high, several levels, each level in a different size, but some steps have what would seem to be 4 meters in height, with perfect 90-degree angles and perfect precision done to them. Clearly great work and meticulous work into this site. Last time this site was underwater was before the last ice age, before 10,000 years BC. And this means this site is more than 10,000 years old. And this contradicts the whole theory on how old civilization actually is. And this is the reason why this site investigation wasn't funded. And when this was discovered, so many archaeologists went to the place to actually unravel this big statement. They wanted to see if it was true. That the most established scientists actually rejected the theory and made everything possible to actually suppress any public investigation of this. All those archaeologists that are researching this had to do it in an independent way, publish their independent works, because it was so outrageous and it was so contradictory that they just ignored it and are still trying to suppress it. But you can still find the pictures and the videos in YouTube. Just search underwater ruins in Japan or Yonaguni ruins, and you'll find the videos showing you how these ruins are still there. They're underwater and they're amazing and not accounted for. And other interesting things, for example, we see megalithical archaeological sites all over the world, and from the South American ones to the Mexican ones to the by Mexican, not only Mexico, there were Mayans, there were Aztecs, there were Olmecs, there were Incas and more cultures, but the megalithical ones are really interesting because in Peru, for example, or in Bolivia, in Peru, you get these archaeological sites in a place called Ollantaytambo. I was there myself, and it's amazing. The huge stones, some of them weigh 100 tons, like 100 cars put together. And they weren't supposed to have stone cutting, really advanced metal cutting tools, or the wheels. So how did they transport that thing? Because they were made out of granite. Granite was closest 5 miles away. They went to the 5 miles away mountain where they're supposed to have cut the granite from, and they found that the granite was still in stone blocks. There are some blocks that they didn't finish, they left there unfinished, and this means they cut these things there already and transported them 5 miles through a river, up a stream, up a hillside, and put them in the archaeological site without being broken one single bit, without a wheel. That's kind of hard for me to believe. And they cut these things out of granite, which is pretty hard to cut. Pretty much no known stone, or besides diamond, nothing can cut granite. And they would cut not roughly like we would cut, any brick, man-made brick. It was actually made in such a perfect way that you can't fit a single piece of paper after thousands of years in between these giant blocks, which are not square, by the way. They're multi-formed and multi-shaped, like a puzzle. Each one has a particular shape, and they puzzle in together to make a huge wall, which would just make me question, why did they bother in doing such a complicated way if they didn't have the technology to do such an amazing task? These sites by mainstream are considered to be some less than 1,000 years old, and some 2,000 years old. But when you think about it, it is pretty crazy, because what happens is that these stone blocks were set there probably a long time ago, thousands of years ago, and I'll say why later. And then the Incas, for example, that were later on constructed on the same sites, they reoccupied the same sites, and that's why we think that they were part of a 1,000-year-old culture. However, I think many archaeology experts think that they were done many thousands of years before that, with technologies and methods that we don't account for today. In Tiahuanaco, it's in Bolivia. They have pretty much similar constructing ways of making buildings and archaeological sites. Huge stone blocks that go from 100 to 200 tons, put together in perfect fashion with 90-degree angles, with a smooth surface, so smooth that it can be related to optical. It could be accounted for in optical precision, and they were just some of them were destroyed because of there appears to have been some big not an earthquake, but some big catastrophic event over there some thousands of years ago. But some of these walls are still intact, and in between each block they found that there was these small indentations that would connect one block to the other, and so on. And these indentations still had some remains of molten metal which had been molten on them some time ago. Now, what archaeologists, really critical archaeologists and objective archaeologists, say is that there is no way that in mainstream conception of these cultures they could have done this, because in order to have poured molten metal into one of these to the next without the metal hardening up, they have to have had some technology that enabled the metal to remain heated enough to a certain temperature to remain molten. So what kind of technology did they have to do this, and to cut the enormous blocks and transport them without being broken, and transport them and fit them together, and with such precision that it's almost, I was in Peru myself, it's hard to believe that they did this, because frankly I wouldn't think of an architect that couldn't do this with the most expensive and the most amazing technology that we have today. And that would be the only, pretty much investing millions of dollars, pretty much the only way we could do such feats.